it's my pleasure to introduce Peter and Angela. And rather than stealing your thunder, as it were, for this podcast, I'm going to just ask you to introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about the background and inspiration that has led you to the product we're going to discuss today.
Sure thing. I'm going to dive in, Pete. I'm Angela, and I'm a former teacher. So I taught for, nearly 10 years in London schools in a variety of contexts. And I now work in education policy at the DFE in the UK. And Pete and I met teaching. So we just stayed in touch and were chatting about the things that we loved about teaching and the things we didn't love so much. Report writing was one of the things we didn't love so much. And so Real Fast Reports, the kernel of the idea of Real Fast Reports was born at that point.
I'm Peter. I taught with Angela back in London, as she says. I was a teacher for 12 years. And for the last few years, I've been a full-time developer and entrepreneur. The idea for Real Fast Reports came around last year. When a friend of mine was showing me GPT3, which is one of the forerunners to ChatGPT, and the amazing things it could write about. He gave it some really random instructions to write about things like telling him a joke about a toilet, or writing a UK drill rap song about bee pollen, like really testing the boundaries. And the responses were incredible. So at that point, when I saw it, I was like, okay, this tool is gonna be a game changer, I think, and have a big impact. And it wasn't long after that I made the connection. I was talking to a teacher friend of mine about report writing, and I made the connection, and I was like, wow, this could really save teachers a lot of time and potentially improve the quality of their reports. So that's how the idea was born.
But he left out is that he then drunkenly sent me a really excited voice note at about, 2 a.m. in the morning. So, yeah.
You still have it? Yeah, I was going to say, you still got that. Just to hold it over him as and when the time fits. So you've obviously got this idea. Background-wise, obviously you mentioned your teachers. What were your subjects? What were your specialisms? I
was chemistry, and Pete was physics.
Oh, wow, fantastic! We got a trio here because I'm a biologist. So,
oh, great!
No way.
That's definitely a department.
Okay, so that's quite interesting, isn't it? Because people have this perception that, hang on a minute, you're not teaching ICT, you've got no background in this. It's like, how did this then all come about? How did it come to what it is today?
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, I've been developing pretty much for as long as I've been teaching. So pretty much after I left uni, I started having ideas. In fact, the very first site I built was with my friend Sam, who was the guy who was telling me about GPT-3 last year. So the first site I ever built was a social network for around sport, trying to connect people with other people to play sport with, or sporting venues or sports clubs, stuff like that. So anyway, I started programming way back after I left uni, and since then I've been constantly working on projects. So this isn't the first website I've built, the first web app that I've built.
It's not your first rodeo.
No,
not your first
not
rodeo.
my first rodeo, no.
And for me, in between being a teacher and working in policy, I did a brief stint in an ed tech startup. So I had sort of
Fantastic. So, Real Fast Reports, we're giving it away. That's what we want to talk about. And you have both very kindly allowed me kind of a sneak use of it for the past week, which actually is timely for me because we are in the middle of assessments and marking and then having to write reports afterwards. But there's going to be a lot of people out there listening and watching who may not have heard of it. So just explain to us how Real Fast Reports work.
It sort of does what it says on the tin, really. So it aims to make really great reports really quickly. And so, yeah, it speeds up the process for teachers in a few ways. So the first is that you don't need to write in full sentences. You can write in brief notes. And then the AI turns those notes into a crafted paragraph, because when you're writing reports, often that's the bit that takes time. And then the second part of the time-saving sort of features, I guess, is the personalized comment bank that you build up, which builds up your comments in your own voice that you can quickly search as you type So you can reuse relevant statements with multiple students within the same class.
Fantastic. I imagine there may be some people out there now going, well, okay, well, how is that different from me if I just go and use ChatGPT? You know, what's the significance? What's the benefit then for teachers using this?
Yeah, there's quite a few differences. I've got a long list of differences, actually. Someone asked me this question for the first time yesterday. Firstly, ChatGPT, just from a purely practical sense, it's pretty unreliable at the moment. Either because it's just so popular or because they're trying to push people over to the paid version, which is $20 a month, if I'm not mistaken. So right now, ChatGPT is not actually a particularly reliable option for anyone who wants to get anything done on a tight turnaround. And we know how things are when you're a teacher. Reports often get left to the last minute. You don't want to be relying on ChatGPT, a few hours before the deadline to find, we're over capacity. We'll let you know when we're back online. Whereas we're not using ChatGPT, the web interface. We're using a separate API, which we're paying for and which we always have availability for. So firstly, we have reliability. Secondly, I would say the biggest time saving doesn't come from the AI itself. It comes from the comment bank that Angela mentioned. The fact that all the bullet point comments you write for your students get saved in a comment bank for you, and you can access those really quickly and reuse them. So you can reuse parts of reports whilst still keeping each report personalized and individual. ChatGPT doesn't keep track of a list of all your previous comments. There's no way for you to search them, to find them, to insert them easily. Our entire user interface is built around writing reports in the fastest and most effective way. Whereas ChatGPT is obviously a general purpose tool that can be used for a lot of amazing stuff, but it's not going to speed up your report writing anywhere near as much as real fast reports.
Yeah, I can definitely vouch for that, having used it for this past week and then shown it to some colleagues of mine. We're like, right, let's take the student. So we put the name in first, we can put the sex in, and then we just wrote sort of 4 or 5 comments about how they've done in their assessments and targets and the effectiveness. There's just a couple of things, like we talk about effectiveness, talk about efficiency, and just the accuracy, I think, is probably another word we would talk about of the report. Because again, there's a few things, isn't there, that people would look at this and go, oh, but what about the personality? What about, knowing the student and having that personal touch to it? But I'll be honest, and again, having used it and seen it, you struggle to tell the difference. It is my experience of using it, which again, for all these things in teachers' workload, anything that saves time and can deliver as good, if not better, is a fantastic tool. You mentioned one thing, actually, I want to press you about, Peter, that I've heard, and I'm a complete layman with this, is API. What is API? What does that stand for?
Application Programming Interface, if I'm not mistaken. So basically, it's a way for a computer to interact with OpenAI. So you interact with ChatGPT, let's say. So with ChatGPT, you interact with ChatGPT by physically typing into a box and pressing enter, or recording your voice nowadays as well. And then ChatGPT returns the output to you on the screen for you to look at, and then you type in a box again. So an API basically is what computers use to achieve the same thing. So a computer can automatically send a message to OpenAI, to ChatGPT, and then get the response back. So what we're doing essentially with Real Fast Reports, we've got a web interface as well. So we've got a user interface that's geared around making report writing easy. We then craft from that a prompt to send to ChatGPT. So we send it, instead of you having to say, please write me a report about this student. This student is studying physics, blah, 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 blah. We wrap all of that up, and then via the API, so from our computer talking to the ChatGPT computer, we send that off. Then it sends the response back. Then we do some more processing. We actually do quite a lot of processing before and afterwards. So we're not just straight using ChatGPT either. So the API part is where it's a computer talking to a computer, essentially. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I say I've heard that once or twice when people are talking about putting like the ChatGPT in Excel or in the Google Forms or Google Doc, those types of things. And so I'm just curious as to when they were talking about APIs, what does that mean? And actually, how is it making these things work? But you've explained it very, very well. As I say, as a layman, I stick to human anatomy and physiology. That was great. Thank you ever so much. But saying that, it sounds really complex. And I imagine you must have faced some challenges sort of along the way. So what have been these hurdles for you, and how have you managed to overcome them?
I think there's quite a few, and I wouldn't say we've necessarily overcome them all. Just on a personal level, for Pete and I, we have very little time and there's a lot to do. I think it's a common thing for people who start up something new, is that the to-do list is ever growing, and figuring out which bit to do first when you've got all these great ideas, and the sort of drive to make it as good as it could possibly be all at once is tricky. So that's one challenge which we're continually working on, I'd say. Pete, I don't know if you agree.
Continually.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the to-do list is just never ending and growing.
Yeah.
Always.
And then, but on a sort of more sort of report focused level, it's really difficult to find out about the report writing landscape across different schools. So we know that reports are a thing that we both wrote when we were teachers, and we knew what the pattern obviously was that we'd experienced, but it's different in every school. So some do one a year, some do multiple reporting sessions a year, but trying to understand, I suppose, what that looks like for different teachers around the world is a challenge that we definitely equally haven't cracked.
Yeah, there's never a one size fits all.
No.
And from my experience of working in several schools, but international back in the UK, everyone has a different sort of structure template, as it were, for what they want reports to say, or how many boxes you have to fit into, and how many characters or words you're allowed. It's a challenge, isn't it?
Exactly.
So, okay. Well, it's one of those that we talk about. That seems kind of a small thing for it, really. You're both managing busy lives as well, on top of trying to run this business at the end of the day, isn't it? So in terms of that, how are you managing to overcome these things? What are your strategies to keep pushing this forward and keep being successful in those daily lives?
Yeah, I think well, in terms of the time saving and time prioritization, working more hours, squeezing more in. No, I think one of the other issues we face, which we didn't touch on, but I can probably give you a better answer to, is when we first started this out, ChatGPT was not in the media at all. AI wasn't something that people were discussing in the mainstream. And we'd created a report writing tool that used AI. And what we discovered was people weren't even looking for a product that would help them write reports. On Google search terms, there was basically 0 hits for things similar to that. And there's lots of reasons for that we could hypothesize around. So yeah, that was one of the main challenges, but beginning to overcome it, I suppose, because it feels like the media interest in ChatGPT in particular has opened up the eyes and ears, I suppose, of the teaching community to the sort of to the potential to do things slightly differently, and to the potential of entering into a new world of more tech enhanced ways of doing things. So that's definitely helped us in that respect.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I saw that survey recently about how many teachers, because obviously if you survey teachers about who's heard of ChatGPT, surely it's going to be almost everyone, although not everyone. I spoke to someone the other day who hadn't heard of it. But in terms of teachers who have actually tried it, the percentage, according to that survey, was still quite low. I
think it's about 6%, wasn't it? It's low.
Yeah, I was in London last week at a school there, a North London school, and I was talking to a biologist. And he said, I just came across this fantastic thing last week. Have you heard of ChatGPT? I was just like, he didn't want to say. He was like, yeah, I've been using it since December. And he was like, it's been out. I went, yeah, it's been around for a while. And it really does peak and trough, I think, in terms of, I think a lot of it has to do with the teachers being on social media as well.
Yes.
Like the general news, there's bits of it. And we've seen people like on Good Morning Britain talking about things, but actually it's more Twitter, LinkedIn, starting to see a lot of teachers really push and advocate for that. However, there are the skeptics. There are those people out there, aren't there, that are not necessarily against it, but are wary of it. So how does like real fast reports, how do you balance this use of AI with the personal approach, with the teacher input?
Yeah, I mean, there's two things that I would say to that. Firstly, like straight off the bat, people are right to be wary of AI for sure, because it's gonna, I personally, and I think a lot of people would agree, it's gonna cause huge changes in the next probably 1-2 years, to a whole bunch of careers, to a whole bunch of jobs, to the way just a lot of things work. AI is going to have a huge impact. And I think you've got to be critical of that. Absolutely. So if people are skeptical about AI, I'm skeptical about AI myself, even though our business is built on AI, I'm very skeptical about it. How do we balance that with real fast reports? I think the first thing you have to explain to people, because when people hear AI and they hear school report, they think, how can a computer possibly know that student? How can an AI possibly write a report about that student? Which is obviously a completely valid question. And if you said to ChatGPT, write me a science report about Jane, go, it would write you a report, and it would probably be completely useless. It would not be personalized. It would not be accurate. And I think that's what some people are imagining when they hear AI and school reports. They're imagining that's what you're doing. Whereas with real fast reports, it's the teacher who is really writing the report. It's the teacher who's putting all of the factual information in. It's the teacher who's thinking about that student and talking about their strengths, talking about their targets for improvement. So the report is still written by the teacher. We're just using AI to effectively turn bullet points into prose. So I think that's a really important point to get across, that we're not just handing this over to AI and letting the AI write the whole thing.
Yeah, I think adding to that, it's really about emphasising the teacher's voice in the report. And I think having many years of writing report experience, you can sometimes get bogged down in the sort of mundanity of, just another one. But actually what we're trying to do is take time, give teachers time to focus on the feedback part. So can actually do more thinking about what feedback is really important to communicate, rather than spending time and effort on the labour of it, if you like.
Yeah, because that would be sort of a question or a concern is, right, same as comment banks. Let's think of it that way. That was always the big thing. Go and just use comment banks. But after a while, you find yourself just repeating the same comment. It's very much a copy and paste. How do you ensure for the real fast reports, if I'm using the same comments that are there, so the same bullet points, the same information, what's the likelihood of getting then a report that's, almost a copy and paste, or actually does it come out completely different? What's the likelihood of those things happening?
I think it depends to an extent on how much the teacher takes it on themselves in order to give the personal feedback, so that you're completely in control as a teacher as to how many comments are in your comment bank, and therefore the many possible variants, and selecting the right ones that are applicable to your students. So I think it's the same still applies, doesn't it, in this context as it would in writing reports in another way. It's still very much on the teacher to make that judgment call.
So if I put in, let's say if I used 5 comments and for one student, and then I put selected 4 of the same comments for the student beneath, am I going to get a very, very similar report from the AI, or is it powerful enough to amend and tweak and write different contexts? Because I think, again, if the teachers out there who haven't used this yet and are picturing it, that would be one thing of, well, if I select it all through, it's just going to, copy and paste all the same things again. Or is there an element of, change and variation that's going to come into those?
Yeah, so interestingly, with these AIs, this is not something you see, I believe. I haven't actually extensively used the ChatGPT interface, but I don't believe ChatGPT has a randomness parameter in it. I believe it's just a straight interface where you talk to ChatGPT and ChatGPT talks back. But when we use the API, we actually have effectively a randomness parameter, which we can also supply to ChatGPT. So we can tell it what amount of variation we would like for a given input. So if we have the randomness set very low, and you put the same bullet points in again and again and again, you're going to get a very similar output again and again and again. If we turn the randomness up, then you're more likely to get different output for the same input. So this is an interesting feature that the AI has, and this is an interesting question for us about, firstly, where do we set that randomness? And then secondly, do we let the teachers control that randomness? Do we turn that randomness into a parameter in our user interface itself? Because the thing is, when you have the randomness up high, it's more likely the AI could throw in a little comment, or the AI could say something which isn't specifically actually accurate for that student, which you may then have to go back and correct. So if you turn the randomness up, you're going to get a greater variety of outputs for the same input. But you're going to need to proofread them really carefully, and potentially every now and then correct one because the AI has made something up, or effectively made something up that's not accurate. Whereas if you turn the temperature, it's called temperature, this parameter. The randomness, they call it temperature. Don't ask me why. If you turn the randomness down, you're more likely to get the same thing. So right now we've got a low randomness. So really the onus is on the teacher. If your reports are going to come out different, then the onus is on you to put in different information, to put in personalized information, which, by the way, as a parent, and I'm sure as a parent, I don't know if you've noticed this too, but when I read a report that really sounds like it's about my kid, when I read a report that I'm like, oh my God, that's Thomas. Like, this teacher actually knows my son. It makes such a difference to me. And it really, the difference between reading that kind of report and reading a generic, like, Thomas can do this, Thomas can do that, it makes such a difference. And ultimately, like, that responsibility does come down to the teacher. We're doing everything we can to streamline the process. We're doing everything we can to make it as easy as possible. But there's this principle in computer science called garbage in, garbage out, basically. And the idea is, if you put whatever into whatever IT system, whatever technology system you have, if you put garbage in, you get garbage out. There's no machine on earth where you put garbage, useless information in and it generates you something amazing. Like, that doesn't exist. So, to some extent, the onus is on the teacher. But to answer your question, right now, if you put in exactly the same bullet points, it won't come out exactly the same, but it will come out pretty similar because we have the randomness low. But that's something we're going to play around with.
It also leads me to the next question I've got about this, because you mentioned at the start, when you put stuff into ChatGPT and you can say, in the style of, it's like, when the reports are being written then from on your side, is there a specific style that's used, or can teachers, if they want to go, look, I want it to be sort of an informal, I want it to be colloquial, I want it to be slang, or is it always going to come out in the same sort of style of, a professional context?
At the moment, we've set that, and it's going to be as a professional, so as a teacher.
Yeah.
But it is one of the things we're interested in exploring. Maybe not so like slang focused, but just adding that kind of those variables in for the teacher to control. So it might be that, for instance, there's a way for us to ask for feedback on the output, and you might say it's too formal or it's too informal, which could help us create a bit more of a personalized experience. But at the moment, no, it's set very much as a teacher writing a report in a formal way. And I can
clarify it does come out like that as well.
Yeah. No, it comes out really well. I mean, it comes out, I think for the majority of cases, it comes out great. I mean, actually, interestingly, because I was concerned about this too. We have a school using it, and I always ask them to send over a couple of examples of reports. So I have an idea of what we're aiming the AI to get to. And then I look at what the AI generates and I compare them. And for one school, their reports came across as really formal. The level of language was quite high. The sentences were quite long. I was like, okay, I don't think the AI is going to imitate this. And I didn't try and make the AI imitate it. So I just left the AI as it was. And then when we were getting feedback from the school, I asked the teacher in charge of trialing real fast reports, did you notice there was a difference? Did you notice it didn't write in the same way as the examples you gave me? And she did notice, and she preferred it. So because it does write in a way that's very understandable and very readable, which perhaps ultimately is more important in this case than putting across an image of intellectuality or do you know what I mean? So it's interesting.
And her other comment, I think, was about actually it helped to bring consistency across the teaching cohort within their school, whereas the writing styles had perhaps some been incredibly formal and some been much more plain English. actually this was a standardization that they'd found positive to.
Yeah, I have to agree with that in terms of writing reports at the moment and report checking. I generally have a very colloquial style, so I have to really rein it in and try and be as very formal as possible. But there's always the same spelling mistakes that I put across. Practice is one. I am terrible.
This is in their style guide, actually. So another thing. Sorry, I interrupted you, but I'm so excited about it. another feature we have. I don't know why. Like, my favorite thing in life, basically, is like seeing a problem that someone has and like fixing it. Basically, I don't know why, but it is. So yeah, this was one of so schools also have the option. So schools can buy real fast reports for all of their teachers. And one thing we can do is incorporate their style guide into an automatic proofreader. So it can check all of the reports and make sure they can, and it's exactly things like that, making sure there's a comma after however, making sure practice is spelled correctly if it's the verb or the noun, making sure you refer to co-curricular activities, not extracurricular activities. So we have this feature for schools where it can find all of those mistakes in your reports and either correct them or highlight them. Anyway, sorry.
No. The point I was getting to is it is a really good thing, because even from our side as scientists, we have English departments, MFL departments. We're not necessarily have the same understanding as the grammar or the language concept, and this is why we talk about it now in the international classroom. You have teachers whose first language might not be English, and actually then having that there to structure a report for them. For parents, let's say we've got Arabic and Islamic, it might not be your first language. It could be that you're someone who's French, who's teaching French, but having that there when you can input, and then having, I'm going to say 99% perfect English output, is actually a fantastic consistency and something schools should really inquire about. So speaking of that inquiry, if I am a school and they're listening to this, a teacher listening to this, and I want to find out more about real fast reports, where are you going to direct them to?
If you're a teacher, you can just go straight to realfastreports.com and sign up. It's completely free to try. You can write 10 reports and get a feel for it. If you are a school, just drop us an email on hello@realfastreports.com and we can book in a call to find out more about your needs. Typically, if you decide to go ahead, we can get set up within 24 hours and have your teachers writing their reports way quicker and writing better reports.
Yeah, we'll put all those links in the description below. But talk me through and this is what I've experienced, the trialing period. So you get 10 reports. How do you guys do this then? Because it's slightly different, isn't it? Sorry about that. I should elaborate part. So when I say different in a trial, it's like you get credits, don't you?
Yeah. So we've termed them credits. A credit basically is the cost of a report. But in order to sort of get people to have a feel for the product, everybody who signs up gets 10 credits, 10 reports to have a go. And the hope is that by the time you've had a go, maybe even before you get to 10, you love it so much that you want to buy some more credits. So the price point is pretty low. It sort of works out a few pence per report, depending on how many you buy. But the prices are on the website as well to have a look at.
Yeah, and again, we'll put the link to that in the description. So 1 credit, 1 report, but let's be accurate with this. When we talk about a report, what's the limit that you guys, or the character limit that you guys have on there?
Well, by the time this video goes live, it will be 1 credit per report, and that's the end of it. That's changing, yeah. So previously, the number of credits used depended on the length of the report, but that's not going to be the case now. We just simplified things, so now it's the same pricing, but 1 credit is 1 report, up to a maximum of 1,000 characters of input, which is either 1,000 or 1,500 characters of input, depending on if you're effectively secondary or primary. Typically, primary school teachers have to write longer reports because they may have a section about English, a section about maths, multiple sections. So yeah, it's 1 credit per report. And that the 1,000 characters or 1,500 should be long enough for any report we've come across so far.
Yeah, I was going to say, starting to get like War and Peace then, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay, fantastic. So I am sold on this and I started using it. What would be some of your tips for me using it? How can I get the most out of this software? What would you guys recommend?
I think few basics, I suppose, would be come armed with information because, like we said, garbage in, garbage out. You need to have the right information in front of you. So your mark book, your test scores, your attendance records, etc., those kinds of things. we've also heard that it can actually be quite tiring writing reports using real fast reports, because you're thinking more, because you're not doing kind of the boring typing. So come fresh to the game, basically. So your brain is ready, because then it will be much easier and faster.
Or alternatively, I have another proposal for you. And actually, to be honest, this when I was thinking about it, and when we started building it and we started testing it, this for me was the most revolutionary feature of it personally. With real fast reports, you can add bullet points at any time. There's nothing stopping you logging in. Let's say the whole class are doing presentations that they've been researching different organs in the body, and they're going to do a presentation about that organ. You quickly open up real fast reports, and when they do a presentation, you could just add a couple of bullet points on some positives or some things to improve about their presentation. Or when you're marking tests, if someone's made a particularly big improvement in a test, you could just jot that down into real fast reports. And by adding in feedback every now and then, as and when these real events happen, you get two outcomes. Firstly, when it comes to the end of term or at the end of year, your reports are effectively already written. So there's no end of term rush, there's no end of year rush. It's just press the button and your reports are done, which to me would be a dream come true. But on top of that, I think, and if people did this, I don't know if as a teacher I would do this, but who knows? The other thing I think you would get from that is incredibly increased accuracy in terms of the actual content of the reports and personalization. I remember as a teacher writing reports, after you've written a certain number of reports and your brain starts to melt, like my image of it is that you're not actually writing a report about that student. You're writing a report about an image of that student. And it's a blurry image, and it's not an accurate image necessarily. And you might be forgetting really important things about that student. And you might be remembering things about that student that actually happened 3 years ago when you taught them, a long time ago. And do you know what I mean? I don't know. I feel like the accuracy of school reports sometimes is actually quite questionable because of the way we do them in a big rush at the end of term or the end of year. So my biggest tip would be spread the load, start early, log in every now and then, update your bullet points, and get much better and much more accurate reports and no stress at the end of term. That would be my top tip.
I like that idea, having just thought it through, because it's also one of the things that I like about the software is when you log in and you go there, you actually set up as classes, don't you? So you have your individual classes and you can state the type of report that you're writing. So like you're saying, if it's an end of term report, if you are one of those few teachers out there that's highly organized and consistent and disciplined with doing these things, actually, I could see that being really, really useful, rather than, trying to cram in 48 hours, scratching your brain of, I think little Jimmy was, and just putting in something from there. So no, that's great. That's great. Some wonderful tips there. So thank you. So this thing is out there now, but obviously big ideas, any future developments or further plans for real fast reports?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, one of them we've already touched upon, which is this idea of the teacher's voice. And at the moment, all of our reports are coming out with effectively the same voice. So we're going to look into, and if the current version of ChatGPT can't do this, then there's murmurs that GPT4, which will be more sophisticated than GPT3, and ChatGPT is going to be coming out soon. So we're hoping that a teacher would be able to paste in 1 or 2 or 3 reports that they've previously written, and the AI will be able to analyze that and emulate the style of that. So we might be able to capture the voice of each teacher more accurately.
Fantastic. You mentioned voice earlier in terms of the GPT being able to understand voice. Any potential ideas for people like myself who would rather dictate than type?
Many things on our back burner list.
Yeah.
There's so many.
If you're not watching this and listening, you can see them just closely keeping these cards to their chest in terms of what do we really want to tell them about this?
No, I'd love to do it. I'd love to do it.
If you name an idea, we probably had it. It's just a matter of figuring out what order to do things in, I think.
That's another area which, again, is improving. And in fact, OpenAI, the people who make ChatGPT, they've also got a voice-to-text service as well, which is apparently pretty good. Because if you're going to use it, it's got to be good. I mean, technically speaking, teachers you can probably do that yourself anyway, right? Because on your keyboard, on mobile keyboards, you have a microphone button to type. I have no idea how you make a new line with that because I never tried it, but I think you could probably already do it.
I think in the very first feature or very first intonation of them, though, you had to actually tell them. I remember when there was something called like dragon. I can't remember it's the very first one, but you had to say when you wanted a comma, full stop, capital. You had to tell it that, and so I imagine to some extent the first editions of it may still have those that require it. But it would just be, again, imagine if you could take the colloquial nature out of it, because we all speak differently how we type. And I, unfortunately, as a seasoned retired rugby player, I was typing something the other day, and I'd injuries on fingers specifically. But I managed to dislocate my finger playing touch, of all things, the most just caught the ball weirdly. But I was having to type something for a period of time typing, and my little finger, which is what it was just cramping, like seriously cramping up. So anything that alleviates the need to type, let alone type like this, because I can normally to do that is again, it's all working on efficiency and things like that. What have you got? What's that you've got there? Then?
Just got it up on the screen. Try the voice typing, just using the keyboard voice button. I just want to give it a go. I mean, you can
go for that here. We can.
Works really hard. Always hands in homework on time. Sometimes arrives late. Okay, so it's doing a great job. It's doing a great job. Doing it all in one line. What should I say to make it go onto a new line?
New bullet.
It doesn't know it's typing bullet points. Should I just say new line?
Or press return. Yeah.
Let's go. Okay, I'm going to give it a go.
Riveting watching, by the way.
Riveting. Now it's going to be typing riveting about this poor kid. New line. Works really hard. New line. No, it's literally writing new line.
Oh.
I should have done my homework with this.
I was going to say...
No, it's literally writing new line.
Yeah. I imagine there is something out there that would enable you to, or like, voice a new line or a new paragraph start. So you have to do some research on it, be curious and go and find out. So... Okay, perfect. That's guys, wonderful. Thank you both, Peter, Angela, for coming on and speaking to me today about this. It's something, again, having used it now, I'm probably one of those hooked onto it. It is just so time efficient, so effective. And considering it's probably you guys would say, look, it's still in its infancy, there's still more to come. But considering how good it is right now, it's exciting to see how good it's going to get in the future and all these new things that you're going to bring into it to really just benefit the lives of teachers and their workloads. So it's been wonderful speaking to you both and hearing about this. So thank you ever so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for your time, Alex.
Yeah, and thanks for the positive feedback. We love to hear it. It's great.
Great stuff. All right, guys, you take care. Thank you ever so much.
Cheers.
Cheers.